I think that the key thing, whether it's in entertainment or in other industries, when it comes to inspiring young people, is like they need to be able to see the opportunity and they need to be able to see that it's possible. You got to open their eyes to what could be.
Welcome to LatinX Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Yanire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Carlos Salcines, a Cuban-American born and raised in McAllen, Texas, whose Latinidad helped him add a multicultural twist to how movies are being advertised in Hollywood. And he is here to tell you, si se puede, my friends, si se puede. Carlos Salcines, welcome to LatinX Can.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for just being here and contributing to this project.
Of course.
Let's start a little bit by talking about your story and where your story begins.
So I am a Cuban-American from South Texas, originally from McAllen, Texas, very South Texas on the Mexican border. And yeah, my family, came to the U.S. in the 60s, but I was born and raised in McAllen, Texas, and, had my Cuban background, but very much grew up on the Mexican border. Yeah. So have a little bit of a blended, Latino culture going on. Yeah. And ended up graduated high school, went to the University of Texas at Austin. And then eventually after I graduated that, I moved out to LA and started, working in the entertainment industry.
Right. I wonder what it was like for you to grow up in, at this area of the country that has such a strong Mexican influence. Because when I came to the U.S., I went to UF, so it was the East Coast. So I had a lot of influence from Cuba, Colombia, Venezuela, right? And then it wasn't until like my junior year, probably, that I made it to California to visit a friend, and we went to San Diego. And then it was a lot of Mexican culture, right? And it was like, wow, this is just like Florida, but with Mexican people. This is fascinating.
Yeah. My high school was, I think, 85% Mexican. And at the time, I believe that my brother and I were the only two Cubans at the school. So it was an interesting dynamic because it's very different from the rest of the country where white people are the minority. Like I was I'm still Latino, but I'd get a little bit of that, like people calling me güero in the hall, and I'd have to on and talk in Spanish, like I'm not a güero, that kind of stuff. But no, I'm very proud of the Cuban part, but I'm also very proud about being from McAllen, Texas. And I love South Texas. And it's interesting because in my job, which I know we'll talk about later, the Latino audience and the Hispanic audience are super important to what I do for my job. And places like McAllen and El Paso and Harlingen and San Antonio and those kinds of cities are really important to movie going and that stuff. So I love being from McAllen, Texas.
That's amazing. And I also think that now that I live in Houston, it's one of those places in the country, Texas itself, is like where you get influence from both sort of like regions of Latin America that get represented, right? So I think it's really cool. It's just nice exposure to just the diversity that's within the Latino community as well.
Yes. And that is a complicated subject, the diversity in the Latino community.
It definitely is, for sure. Yeah. And so you mentioned that you pursued your bachelor's degree in radio, television, film, and advertising from UT Austin from 2000 to 2004, right? And so today we talk about the representation of Latinx people in media, right? And this was like a long time ago when you decided to go into film and television. So what inspired you to get into a field where you probably didn't see yourself represented at that time?
Yeah. I went to college thinking that I was going to be a doctor. I was dead set. I had been in all the health organizations in high school. I'd interned at the hospital. I'd done all the things. And then I got to college and while it was like after my freshman year of college, it was during my freshman year, I was still in the dorms. I got a phone call from a cousin of mine that was working at Univision, and she was in sales at Univision. And she invited me to the first ever Latin Grammys to go with her and like her crew of sales guys and her clients and whatever. And so she knew that I was very into movies and television and like the Hollywood and celebrity and all of it. Like I just always, gravitated towards that. Never thought about it as a career, of course. But, I went to that event and I was just, I was 18 looking like I was 12, like with probably in the suit that barely fit me. But I met like all of, the people she worked with and all of these people that are like, were actively working in entertainment and successful at it. And it kind of changed my perception about what was possible. An idea of like, oh, maybe I could move to California or move to Los Angeles. Maybe I could work in entertainment. Like maybe that's not something that's so far away and unattainable. Yeah. That had not crossed my mind until that experience. Yeah. Like it just like wasn't even on my radar. And I came back and ended up changing my major to like applying to the communication school and telling my parents that I was going to switch to radio, television, film. And and just like the classic Latino parents that they are, they said, what in the hell? Absolutely not. And so they are the ones that, kind of pushed me to double major in advertising. And then I graduated and I moved out here and ended up doing exactly that, which was getting a job in marketing TV shows.
Right. Yeah. I mean, immigrant parents, I think for them, or even for me, it's hard to be like, we came to this country for like opportunities and for you to have a better future. And then it's the conundrum that then the first generation faces, right? And like, but you came here for opportunities and this is my opportunity, right?
I mean, the funny part, I was just at a lunch today and I literally told someone like, man, I hope my son is just like an accountant. Or like, or like an engineer or something. So I guess it's a little bit of is just in the blood,
It will leave you. We'll go from the next generation to the next. Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned that just really struck me right now is that how your cousin had such tremendous influence in what you do today, right? Not really knowing maybe when she invited you to that event, what would happen, but also like the role that we have with our own community and our families in just exposing them, helping them to see something different.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true. And I just realized that you asked me about, pursuing this career, having not seen myself in things or Latinos in properties. And I think my answer to that is like, it's something I didn't even think about, which I think is actually very common because being in California in entertainment, I talk about it all the time. Like I'm constantly talking about representation, but I also talk to friends that are still living in McAllen and I've had conversations with it, when I was working on In the Heights, when I was working on Father of the Bride, and they genuinely are saying like, it's not something I think about. This is not on my radar at all. I go watch movies and TV and it's not something I think about. When you have the conversation and explain it like, but what if it could be different? Of course, that perspective changes. But I do think that a majority of the country like just don't think it's just not on their radar. And I think it's not on their radar because they've never seen it or they so rarely see it. And going back to my cousin was incredibly influential because after that event, I came back, kept going in school, finally got into communications. I think it took me like 2 tries or 3 tries to get in. And then I ended up interning in Los Angeles for a summer when I was in college, and I lived with her and her family. And that, having that kind of step and like that familiarity and the family here, it made a huge difference in what was possible for me.
Yeah. And I think that's amazing, right? like we talk about, Latinos in media and movies, but also Latinos in STEM, for example, and just having somebody that can show them what it can be like or what the ropes are like, or even if like you went for a short trip to LA, but some young engineers that have never left Texas have to go to New York to do an internship, right? And how do we do that? It's scary. It can be really scary if you don't have that support.
It's very scary. And I think that the key thing, whether it's in entertainment or in other industries, when it comes to inspiring young people, is like they need to be able to see the opportunity and they need to be able to see that it's possible. You got to open their eyes to what could be. And that trip for me was something that opened up something in me that said like, hey, I could do that. That's actually something that's semi-realistic. And I think that's incredibly important when it comes to what I do and what things that I try to do in my career. I've done with the director of Father of the Bride, we did a day with the Youth Cinema Project, which is an incredible organization that's funded by the Latino Film Institute here. And it's someone that I had worked with over the years, but they do this thing in LA County with, I think it's 6th grade to high school kids. And they give them mentors in all different parts of entertainment and the creative industry, and writers, directors, editors, like all of it. And they give them mentors and they work with these kids and have workshops, but it's like a consistent thing for these kids. It's not a like one day internship, it's consistent. And so for Father of the Bride, the director, we got him to actually come out for the day, and we did a directing workshop with, 25 kids that were like junior high to high school, where they filmed a scene from the movie, directed all of it, edited it together, and then we sat with the director of the movie and showed them the real scene because the movie wasn't out yet. And then we watched all of their scenes and the director gave feedback. And I think those kinds of programs like the Youth Cinema Project and little things like that just make it possible. Like give someone that nugget of an idea that like, hey, maybe that could be me. And I think that's what we need.
Yeah. And so then you mentioned that when you moved to LA, you ended up doing a little bit of what your parents said that you probably could do, which is going into marketing and advertising, right? And so you've been in that field for, I think, probably the majority of your career in Hollywood, right? So talk to me a little bit more about how then your career in that area in marketing and advertising for movies developed.
Yeah. So my first job when I moved out here was a marketing coordinator for 20th Television. And I was specifically doing on-air promotions, which meant that I was, producing the commercials for 20th Television's like syndication shows. So for me, it was really cool because some of their syndicated shows were things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel and like those shows that like I loved. And so, it was just very cool to, even though Buffy wasn't on anymore, Angel, I think, was in its last season back then because it was so long ago. It was still cool to be like kind of just tangentially touching those things that I loved. And so I was there for a year, and then, oh God, this was so long ago. It's like crazy to talk about it. But this was when the WB and the UPN merged into one television network and became the CW. And Fox, which was 20th, right, owned a bunch of TV stations that were losing programming because there were now two networks that had become one. And so at the time, the studio decided to basically launch a television network that was called My Network TV. And it's still on. Here in LA, it's My 13. It's in a lot of other markets as My something with the number.
Okay.
And they assigned the launch of that network to the syndication branch. And so this team of people, and I was like bottom of the totem pole, but there were so few of us that it was like there was no, like, the totem pole was gone because everyone was just like working like crazy. And, we produced an upfront and we did all these things that like we had never done before and like the department had never done. Like, this was a syndication branch and we were launching a network. And so we did that and it was huge. And it was that job was insane. Like, I remember sleeping on couches, like in an office, and then like waking up and going to work and just like continuing to work. And like, it was really intense. And so I was there for a few years and learned so much because of that lack of, like, it didn't matter that I was a coordinator. I was doing just as much as, everyone.
Right. And it was a huge need. And then you were there to sort of like fill it, Right.
Yeah, it totally was that. But what happened was, in classic corporate America, they were going to promote me to manager, and I was going to be making less money than I was making in overtime at the time because I was working so much. So I was like, I can't take the job because that's not cool. And I ended up then jumping over to Telepictures, which was another syndication company that's actually part of Warner Brothers. And I worked on Ellen, and I did 1 year on TMZ doing promos for TMZ.
Cool.
TMZ was not for me. And so I did that for a year. The first season of TMZ ever. Like, I worked on it the first season, and it wasn't what I had signed up for. I had gone to that job to work on Ellen, and I worked on Ellen for a year, and then they moved me as part of it. And TMZ was, those episodes don't exist anywhere, but I literally was like in the background of that newsroom in so many episodes. My friends would send me photos like, oh my God, you look so miserable in the background of this with your Starbucks, because that morning meeting would tape at like 5 a.m. So that was terrible. But I was there, hated TMZ, so wanted to go back, and I ended up going back to My Network TV and 20th Television, and I worked with them as a manager, but at a better salary for a few years. Okay. And then Fox decided to launch they wanted to get into the Spanish language television game and launch a Spanish language network. This was in 2012. And they were launching a network called Mundo Fox that they wanted to compete with Univision and Telemundo and be in that game. And when I saw that job, it was a job for like a director of affiliate marketing. I, kind of for the first time in my career realized that, like, hey, maybe, I can take all of these skills that I've learned that have never like involved my Latinidad or being Latino or anything, and apply them to a job where I can also use that other part of me and like use my culture and use that in my job. And, we launched that network, and it was really great. And I met a ton of people that I loved, and we launched the network. It ultimately was a failure because of a bunch of other stuff that we don't need to get into. But I was there for the launch and the crash of the network, but it was another one of those jobs where I learned so much because it was like a bit of that startup mentality. And that I started as an affiliate person, which meant that I was the one working with all of the television stations across the country. Like, I was kind of the conduit between the network and the TV station.
Oh, okay.
And ultimately ended up becoming like the number 2 to the CMO of the network, doing a little like more all-encompassing marketing. So doing media plans, doing creative things, promotions, grassroots and regional, and still doing affiliate as well, but like doing it all. And then that job, I think, really positioned me well for where I am now.
Right. And so today you are the vice president of multicultural marketing at Warner Bros. Pictures, right? Yes. So I'm curious, because you're saying back in 2012, that was maybe the first time that your Latinidad was like something that could give you that competitive advantage. Now you're vice president of multicultural marketing, and I wonder how your Latinidad helps you be successful at your job.
Yeah, I mean, so my current job is I work on all of the Warner Brothers Pictures movies with a team of folks that our job is to market the films to different cultures. So we work on every movie, but we kind of like create bespoke campaigns for Latinos, for Black audiences, AAPI or Asian American audiences. And so being Latino, obviously, and specifically having that Cuban background, but then also understanding Mexican culture because of where I grew up has been incredibly helpful, because Hispanic audiences, Latino, whatever you want to, whichever nomenclature works, is a huge chunk of box office revenue. Depending on the movie, on a movie's opening weekend, it could be on average 21% of an audience. But if it's a horror movie, you could end up in the 30s. When we had The Curse of La Llorona, I think that opening weekend, Latino, which is not an ideal movie to talk about this, but it's because it's a horror movie and it did have that Latino angle. I think that opening weekend was like 40-something% Latino. These are huge numbers.
Yeah.
Its audience comprises. And sometimes, like what I was saying about these markets like McAllen and San Antonio and whatever, on a horror movie, a Conjuring universe movie, because we work on those, sometimes the number one theater in the country will be in El Paso.
Wow.
Like, that's the highest grossing theater in the country for that movie. And that's just pretty incredible to see, like the power of the Hispanic community.
That's amazing. I had no idea about how important we are in terms of consumers, right, of these products. And I just find it really funny because I think we were all traumatized with La Llorona when we were little kids, and then just like trying to go and relive our childhood traumas. It's kind of interesting.
It's interesting because I love horror movies. And it just turns out that Latino audiences love horror movies. So I don't know. I guess I fall into the bucket there.
Right. And then the other thing that you were mentioning, right, like we were talking earlier, is that we are also a complicated group because we are Latinos or Latinx people in the U.S., but we all come from our own countries. We all come from our own cultures, right? And so some people are against this term of, oh, I'm not a Latino or whatever, I'm just Venezuelan, for example. But as a group, it brings so much power when we are united in this umbrella of being Latinos, right? And we can do that while we celebrate our differences, and we also find our points in common, right?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting because this was something we talk about a lot at work, because I worked on a movie called In the Heights that I had never had that experience watching a movie, but I'm Cuban, right? So I watched that movie and I felt something in me that I had never seen while watching a movie, which is like, wow, this is speaking directly to me. And, that movie ultimately, and I love that movie so much, but it didn't resonate with audiences in at a mass scale. I think it was very impactful for us, like a smaller audience. But it ultimately didn't reach that like scale of like a massive, big blockbuster movie. And I think part of it was because there is this idea that it's not for me, because it did have a a Mexican actress in a lead role with Melissa Barrera. And but ultimately the music, the flags, the all of it was very Caribbean. It was about Dominicans and Puerto Ricans and Cubans, and that was the majority of the culture in the movie stemmed from that. And so I think that was a bit part of why it didn't necessarily like hit in the same way with all Latino audiences. And so it's just really, really complicated. And I think there is something about, because there is such a lack of diverse content out there.
Yeah.
When there is something that is quote unquote Latino, you expect it to represent an entire community.
Yeah.
One piece of content cannot do that. It's not possible. So I think there needs to be a mindset shift within Hispanics in the US where it can have Latino culture in it and have Hispanic culture, and you can enjoy it just as that. It doesn't need to be exactly your culture. We enjoy movies all the time with white people's culture in it.
Yeah, for sure.
Culture, and we just accept it, and that's what we watch, and we don't think about it in that way. But yet, when it's something that's ours, we assign so much pressure. We put so much pressure on it that it's never going to live up to that.
Yeah, we have unrealistic expectations, right? For something that represents us. I mean, I feel what you're saying with In the Heights. I loved it. We watched it here at home, my husband and I. And I'm from Venezuela and he's from Puerto Rico. So we were like dancing to every song and we were like, this is amazing. I love this. But then it comes back to that experience that I had, right? Florida versus San Diego. And it's like, wow, it's so different. But it doesn't mean that I don't get interested in learning more about, all the taco stalls that are here in San Diego and how to, taste different kinds of food and just learn even more about this Latino culture that is out there, all the different places in Latin America. It just makes us even better. There's a lot more things that we can draw from.
Yeah. And it's, united, we have more power. And I think that the number one thing is like we need to support each other and support content. If you want to see more content with people that look like you, we need to support content of
people like that look like you, even though for sure. Yeah. And I think the other thing that I have, because when I came to the States when I was 21, I think close to 21. So I grew up in Venezuela, right? So when I started like watching stuff or like Latino shows or Latinx shows in the US, some of them don't represent me. I don't feel like immediately connected to the story. Like I'm thinking of Gentefied, for example, on Netflix. I don't necessarily connect directly with that story because that's not my story. And then I even remember having this initial thought of like, oh, maybe this show is not for me. But then I go and I make the effort to continue watching for a couple of more episodes. And then they grab me because it's an experience that I can learn from. And I would love to learn about how other Latinos are living and are experiencing life in the US.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think there's a few shows like that. And the thing is, like, the Hispanic community is so diverse that there's so much room for that those different experiences.
For sure.
Totally right. I mean, Gentefied, Vida, all those shows, they're all so different.
Yeah. So you've mentioned already a couple of times working on Father of the Bride. And you just throw it in there nonchalantly. But Father of the Bride was a movie adaptation that aired earlier this summer, right? And the movie I remember is the one with Steve Martin from 91, I think, right? And so I thought, oh, maybe this is just the same movie. We're just like with a different cast. But then I realized that even that movie in 91 already was an adaptation, right? But then this one that just aired, it had a twist to it, right? It had a multicultural cast. I think it's an all Latino cast. And then on top of it, it stars Gloria Estefan. And as a Cuban-American, I don't know, I feel that I'm Venezuelan and I'm like already freaking out for working with Gloria Estefan. How was it for you and your family to be involved in that project?
I love Gloria Estefan. And I think the best part of the experience working with Gloria Estefan is that she's as wonderful and great as you kind of hope that someone like that would be. And including, because I got to meet her husband, Emilio, as well, and her team of people. And, we work with a lot of celebrities and talent and things, and they were first class. Like, it was amazing. It was the best experience. And I'm not going to lie, I was freaking out inside.
Poker face.
Yeah, playing it cool on the outside, as cool as possible. But the first time I interacted with her, because, we're marketing, so we the movie's already shot, everything's already happened. And, we work with the talent teams, but you don't necessarily meet the talent until you're actually doing things. Was at a creative content shoot where the cast was all together shooting things. By the way, and getting to meet Andy Garcia was another, these are people that this is Cuban royalty. This is
for sure.
And they were all so great. And of course with Gloria, and I never do this with talent ever, but that first time I met her, I had to hold her aside and be like, I just need to tell you that I'm Cuban and this means a lot. And the whole, I kind of told her, and she was so amazing. And, over everything that we did on that movie and working on that movie, they just continued to be great. And ultimately, at the premiere, because we had the premiere in Miami.
Oh, wow.
On Calle Ocho, which was amazing. And Emilio had helped us acquire a salsa band to perform at the premiere, at the party and the whole thing. And she got up there with Andy Garcia and Emilio on the drums, conga drums, the whole thing. And she sang Mi Tierra.
Oh my gosh.
A once in a lifetime, incredible moment that I will never, ever, ever forget. It was so cool. It was so cool.
Oh, wow. I'm getting goosebumps right now.
And then the other thing was that the premiere was in Miami, but we also did a big screening with the Latino Film Festival here in LA called La LIF, which is the Los Angeles Latino International Film Festival. And that film festival is part of I talked about U Cinema Project earlier. It's part of the Latino Film Institute and what they do. And it was started by Edward James Olmos. So we premiered the movie there with Gloria and Andy and the cast and everybody. And my mom just happened to be in town for that because she had been helping us with our son over the weekend. And I was like, you should stay and come with me to this event. So my mom got to meet Andy and Gloria and Emilio and all of it. And that was pretty cool as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine you pulling Gloria aside and he's like, can we take a picture for my mom?
What's funny in typical, they're so nice, by the way, throughout, I met Emilio once early on and he remembered who I was the entire time throughout the campaign. And they were, again, they're incredible. But my mom just introduced herself, because I was working, introduced herself to Emilio and kind of had started talking to him and whatever. And then so later on when I was like, Mom, we got to get your photo with Gloria, let's go. And when we walked up to them, there was Emilio acting like him and my mom were best friends. And he looked at my mom and saw me, and my mom was like, this is my son. He's working on the marketing of whatever. Emilio was the one that was like, get in here, Gloria, we got to take a picture with these. And he helped us get the picture. So I have a photo with Emilio, Gloria, and my mom, and it's amazing.
Oh, that's amazing. And I feel like these people are so ingrained in our culture, in our Latin culture. I'm Venezuelan, but I know Gloria Estefan. My dad played her songs all the time. I know Mi Tierra, it's the national anthem of Venezuela or something like that. And it's just so great to see them be part of the mainstream, representing all of us just in movies like everybody else. And it's not just a Latino movie. It's a movie for everybody to see. And
that was our main thing with that entire movie it was helped by the fact that Gloria and Andy kind of transcend Latinidad, right? They are just icons and they've been doing this for a long time. But the main thing for us selling the movie was it's not the Latino father of the bride. It's not the Latinx father of the bride. It's just father of the bride. And it just also has Latinos in it. And it's, something that we said a lot while we were working on it and talking about it was it's entertainment with culture. It's not about culture. And so we're allowed to have stories that just are. Not every story needs to be about being Latino. You're allowed to just have a romantic comedy that has Latinos in it. And, it's that normalization of representation that I think is really key and where we all need to get to, where it's just we're just a part of it. And not every story has to be, of course, those stories are important. And, there's a lot of things that are about being Latino and whatever. And those are powerful stories that we need. But we're also allowed to just have a horror movie that has Latinos in it, and a romantic comedy that has Latinos in it, and all of those different genres. And we need that kind of representation.
Yeah. It's part of just, representing our joy. It doesn't have to be only about our suffering. It's also about, all the happy moments that we can live as well.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. Like the number one movie that I'm most excited about for next year is a DC superhero movie called Blue Beetle. And Blue Beetle is a Mexican-American superhero. And so it's cool. I'm being very careful to not call it a Latino superhero movie because it's not. It's just DC's next superhero movie, right?
Yeah.
But also it's about Jaime Reyes, who his family is in the mix, and there's all of this Latinidad within it. But it's just a DC superhero movie with a Latino in it. And it's, by the way, the first Latino-led theatrical superhero film to ever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. We'll make sure that we go and watch it. Right now, I'm having a lot of fun. I have no idea if Wakanda Forever is part of Warner or no, but I'm having a really good time seeing Lupita Nyong'o dancing on stage and just having a good time.
Yeah, I saw the video. They were dancing to Suavemente and they were doing TikToks. It's amazing. It's so cool.
Yes.
I haven't seen that movie yet, but I cannot wait. And I think it's been incredible to see Lupita and Tenoch and the other cast members doing all their interviews, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. So I hope that we see more of that. So the next question I had, movies like Father of the Bride are just a great example of the progress that's being made in terms of representation of the Latinx community, right? But we're almost 20% of the U.S. population. And so I think there's still quite a bit of work to do. As a person who deals with this topic, where do you think are the gaps and what needs to be done in order to just make more progress in this area?
Honestly, the gaps are everywhere.
Encouraging.
From on screen to behind the camera to executives to all of it. Latinos are lagging in representation. And I think there's a lot of effort and talk about on-screen representation. That's obviously the most obvious, right? It's what we're all seeing. I think the key thing is changing executive representation, because to make a difference, we got to change what the conference room looks like, and the people that are green lighting content, and making sure that there are Latinos in those rooms that see the value in our stories. And we need Latino casting directors. We need, we need all of it. But I think the start is really changing what the executives look like. And obviously that's a long game, because that doesn't affect what's on screen tomorrow.
Right.
But I think that's ultimately the biggest hurdle.
Yeah. And so I don't even know that you have an answer for this, but just a general question, because I was debating this with my boss and just talking about diversity and inclusion in the chemical industry, right? And so he's like, oh, but we're owned by private equity, and our owners just want to make sure that the executive team has proven and has evidence of having done what they need to be doing in this new role, right? So I think it's hard to find the diverse talent to do that. And I told him, I think that's the easy way out, because talent is there. You just have to look for it outside your circles, right? And also maybe you might not have 10 executives that are Latin women, for example, in the chemical industry, but you may have 10 senior directors that are Latin women. And now you have to trust them to then step into that game.
Yeah. No, I think you're totally right, because there's a lot of effort also being made when it comes to pipeline programs, getting people into these industries. But then what happens is that people stall out. They don't get promoted. And so they either leave or they do something else, like they kind of don't move up. So it really is that. It's about, finding people that are good. Like no one wants you to hire somebody that's not good at their job. But I have to believe that there are Latinos that know how to do these jobs.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's part of that investment, right? Like if the company really believes in diversity and inclusion, they also have to be willing to take a little bit of risk and say, well, it may not be all in paper, but there's potential and we got to trust it, and then every business move has a little bit of risk.
Yeah. I mean, any hire is a risk, even the one that is coming with all the paperwork and the impeccable resume. That's still a risk.
Yeah. Then the other thing that I wanted to talk about, we kind of just already touched a little bit on show cancellations and what we can do, because there's very few Latino content out there, Latin content out there. So every cancellation hurts. It hurts me for sure. But there's one thing that I want to talk about. And again, I'm just picking your brain because now there's a lot of more streaming services, right? And all of them are under a paywall, right? And so I wonder when we talk about, these Latin films or these Latin shows, they don't have an audience, right? I wonder if that is because these shows are behind a paywall. I think of Gordita Chronicles, for example. And so I watched it and I loved it, but maybe some people don't have HBO Max, and so they can't pay for it. So I wonder if it really want to just get a better idea of what the streaming service is doing for just all movies, right? Because I can see it restrictive in one area, but I can also see a large family that just has one subscription and everybody gets together for family night, movie night, and then the 25 people watch the movie instead of just 25 people going to the movies, right? So, but I just wonder if there's data around there.
I mean, I think that I don't know about when it comes to the cost of streaming services and if that's a huge barrier for people. I do know there's huge numbers of people on these services. So there's a lot of different metrics that are looked at when it comes to what the success of a show is. There's acquisition numbers, which is if somebody's signed up for the service and that's the first thing that they watch, that counts as an acquisition. There's view through, did they finish the show?
Right.
They watch every episode. Did they, there's different metrics and analytics that are taken into account for those things. And I don't know the answer to this. And I agree. I loved Gordita Chronicles a lot. I also don't know this is within the company. So I'm not saying anything bad, but I don't know the answer. When it comes to these shows like Gentefied, which was also recently, that got canceled as well. And those, how much money is being put in to market those shows outside of the Latino community as well. You know what I mean? Are those shows being given the same amount of push that other shows are? And I know also there's a lot of factors, right? How much did the show cost? What stars are in the show? What, who created the show? There's a lot of that affect how much marketing budget goes to something, and it's all about ROI. But I do think that is something to be looked at. Are those shows being given a fair shot when it comes to that? And I think in terms of everyday people and watching these shows, and if you love it, and it's something that is diverse or has those diverse elements, I think that I would encourage people to talk about it, post about it on social media, tell your friends, encourage people to watch it. I think that stuff does matter. And I think the number one way that people watch a new show is because their friend tells them oh my God, you got to see it. It's so good. That's kind of, you can market something all you want, but I think that firsthand recommendation, it has a lot more weight to it. And so, I don't know, kind of a non-answer, but I do know when it comes to Latinos, we do go to the movies and we do spend money on movie tickets. And we do consume, I'm pretty sure, if I don't have the data point in front of me, but like, I'm pretty sure we over-index on streaming services and things like that. And in general, like consuming of entertainment. And so I don't know if the price point is that much of a barrier when it comes to this conversation, because we are spending money on entertainment elsewhere.
So it's more about, supporting each other, like we were just talking about, right? Just making sure that we watch movies that are by Latinos or have Latino talent that may not be 100% us, but it's there and we got to support each other.
Yeah. And I think if you hear yourself saying like, oh, I don't think I relate to that, or I don't think that's for me because it just feels a little off, but it's Latino, like I would ask people to give it a shot. If you don't like it, you don't like it. Don't watch something you don't like.
Exactly.
Like, don't not consume it because you don't think it's exactly your story or exactly your culture.
Right.
Because there's a lot of different people out there and we consume their stories all the time. Yeah,
for sure. I can think of like at least 2 shows. Like I was watching White Lotus, right? I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like there's nothing I can relate to that show, but I watched the whole thing, So.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Carlos, just to close the interview on a light note, one thing that we asked all our guests is, imagine somebody came to visit you in your city. I think you're in LA. And unfortunately, you were at a movie premiere and cannot show them around. And they wanted to get this local sort of taste for the city. So what are your top 3 places or things that you would recommend for them to do while they are in LA?
I hate questions like this, first of all. But I think that sometimes you got to go with the classics, which is, Hollywood and Highland, which is the Chinese theater that has all the handprints. And, it's that classic Hollywood thing that you've seen in 1,000 movies. So if you've never been to LA and you come to LA, I feel like that's something you just have to check off your list because it is it's classic. I love 80s stuff and like 80s rock and roll and, like Motley Crue and that kind of vibe. So there's like the Sunset Strip is something that I love. And some of those bars that like you read, like the Rainbow Room and like those things, just because I love 80s and cool. That whole, thing. Like I went to the Motley Crue and Def Leppard concert a few months ago when they were here. I love that stuff. So if you're into that, I would do that. And then I live in Burbank, and there's which is like a suburb of Los Angeles, but there's a Cuban restaurant called Portos. Okay. Great pastelito de guayaba, ropa vieja, lechon, like the whole thing. So that's where I go to get my Cuban fix.
Fantastic. Well, Carlos, thank you so much for joining us in the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinXcan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and remember, unidos somos más.